The chandelier light glittered like 1,000 tiny knives above her head, each sparkle reflecting the whispers that spread like wildfire across the ballroom. Emma Weston, 6 months pregnant, stood frozen at the edge of the gala, clutching her stomach as if holding her baby was the only thing keeping her upright. The satin fabric of her old evening gown, borrowed from a friend, clung to her swelling belly and made her feel more exposed than ever. At the center of the room, her husband Andrew Weston stood tall in his custom tuxedo, champagne flute in hand, and laughter dripping with arrogance. But it wasn't the tuxedo or his hollow smile that pierced Emma's heart. It was the woman on his arm. Hila Carter, barely 23, flaunted a crimson gown cut scandalously low, her fingers clinging possessively to Andrew's chest. Together, they looked like a cruel portrait of power and youth, the perfect couple for flashing cameras and gossiping investors. The whispers grew louder. Isn't that his wife over there? Pregnant, poor thing, and he's parading another woman? Scandalous. Shameless. Emma's cheeks burned hot, though her body felt ice cold. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. Her baby kicked inside her, reminding her she couldn't just vanish into the night. She had to endure. She had to stand. Then Andrew's voice rose above the murmurs. He was introducing Hila, not as a colleague, not as a friend, but as his future. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed with a smirk, "meet Hila Carter. She represents what my company and my life truly deserve." His eyes deliberately flicked toward Emma, sharp as daggers. Not weakness, not dead weight, but brilliance and beauty. The room gasped. Emma's vision blurred. She felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall. The humiliation was public, brutal, designed to shatter her completely. Her trembling hand reached for the table beside her to steady herself, knocking over a glass of water. The crash echoed louder than her heartbeat, drawing every gaze to her. For one agonizing moment, Emma's eyes locked with Andrew's. He didn't flinch. His smirk widened, and he pulled Hila closer, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh out loud. The cruelty was deliberate. He wanted Emma broken. The ground beneath her heels felt like quicksand. The walls of the grand ballroom closed in. The photographers raised their cameras, hungry for the perfect scandalous shot. Emma's entire world was collapsing, and there was nowhere left to hide. And then, just as she staggered toward the exit, a shadow fell across the doorway. Tall, commanding, and destined to change everything. Emma Weston had not always been the trembling woman humiliated in a glittering ballroom. Just a few years earlier, she was Emma Hayes, the quiet, diligent daughter of a small-town teacher and a seamstress. Life had never been extravagant, but it was steady, warm, and honest. She grew up learning to stitch clothes with her mother, to cook meals from scraps, to dream bigger than her circumstances would allow. Her parents' modest home in rural Pennsylvania had been filled with laughter, prayers before dinner, and the kind of love money could never buy. When she first came to New York City, Emma had no intention of climbing society's ladder. She worked as an administrative assistant in a finance firm, typing long hours for little pay, living in a cramped apartment, and walking home under flickering streetlights. Yet she carried herself with a gentle dignity that made people trust her instantly. She didn't flaunt, didn't complain. She simply worked hard and hoped for a brighter future. It was during one late evening, while she balanced coffee cups and binders in the lobby of her firm, that she met Andrew Weston. His charm was like a spark in the dark, magnetic, confident, impossible to ignore. He offered to help carry her folders, teased her about her stubborn independence, and before long, he was inviting her to dinners she never thought she deserved. Within 6 months, their whirlwind romance ended in a courthouse wedding. Emma thought she had found her fairy tale. She believed Andrew loved her for her heart, not her bank account. She believed his ambition was noble, that he wanted to build a life with her. And when she discovered she was pregnant, she cried tears of joy. She imagined a little boy with Andrew's eyes or a little girl with her mother's smile. She pictured a family, a home, a future filled with bedtime stories and birthday candles. But reality began to corrode that dream. Andrew's smiles grew colder, his words sharper. He criticized her for not earning enough, though she was carrying his child. He mocked her cravings, scolded her for buying baby clothes, and accused her of slowing him down. When she begged him to spend more time with her, he accused her of being clingy, weak. The man she thought was her prince revealed himself to be a predator. Selfish, calculating, and cruel. Still, Emma endured. For the sake of her baby, she bit her tongue and carried the weight of loneliness. She told herself love could heal, that marriage was about forgiveness, that tomorrow would be better. But tomorrow never was. By the 6th month of her pregnancy, she found herself isolated, ridiculed, and abandoned in the very city where she once dared to dream. She spent her nights curled on a second-hand couch, hands cradling her belly, whispering promises to the life inside her. "I'll protect you," she murmured. "Even if it kills me, you won't suffer like I did." Her only source of strength was the child she carried. Each kick, each flutter reminded her she was still alive, still fighting. She would not collapse, not yet. What Emma did not know, however, was that her story was not destined to end in sorrow. Her bloodline carried secrets, a fortune she never flaunted, a power she never claimed. And one man, watching from the shadows, was about to pull her back into the light. The night she thought marked her destruction would soon become the night that revealed who Emma Weston truly was. The Crystal Renaissance Hotel was the crown jewel of Manhattan's social calendar. Its grand ballroom stretched like a cathedral of wealth, dripping with opulence in every corner. Chandeliers the size of carriages swung above polished marble floors that glistened like mirrors. The air was perfumed with imported tulips and roses, flown in overnight from Amsterdam, while a live orchestra played Mozart with delicate precision. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne and caviar, weaving through clusters of the city's most powerful elite. This was the Bright Futures Gala, an annual event where fortunes were pledged under the guise of charity, where reputations were polished, and where the rich came to be seen by the richer. Tonight, journalists from every major outlet lined the velvet ropes outside. Paparazzi flashes painted the street in bursts of white, hungry for the perfect scandal to feed tomorrow's headlines. Inside, business tycoons, fashion icons, and political players mingled like predators circling prey. At the heart of it all stood Andrew Weston. His rise to prominence had been fast, almost reckless. Once a mid-level corporate salesman, he clawed his way into investment deals that brought him money, connections, and a taste for power. Tonight, he wore his success like armor. A hand-tailored tuxedo, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist, and a mistress dressed like temptation itself. He thrived in this world. The attention, the envy, the whispers that he was destined for greater empires. Emma, on the other hand, did not belong here, or at least that was how she was made to feel. She had arrived quietly, hoping to stand beside her husband, to support him, to remind him that even amid glittering chandeliers, he had a wife carrying his child. Instead, she became a ghost at the edge of the room, invisible to everyone except the cruel eyes waiting for her humiliation. The contrast was unbearable. Around her, glasses clinked in celebration of fortunes she couldn't even imagine. Diamonds sparkled at throats, laughter spilled like champagne, and women in gowns worth more than her entire yearly salary whispered behind feathered fans. She stood there in a dress stitched at home, one hand protectively over her swollen belly, trying not to cry. But the cruelty of the night was not silent. Andrew had staged it. He wanted her here. He wanted her to watch as he paraded Ela across the ballroom, introducing her to board members, investors, and journalists as though she were his true queen. The spectacle was deliberate, a dagger twisted in public. The whispers were the worst. They floated through the air like smoke. Why is she even here? Poor thing, he's already moved on. She looks so tired. He deserves better. Emma felt each word pierce her like glass. She wasn't just abandoned, she was ridiculed, reduced to nothing more than a burden, a shadow in a room built to worship light. Her hands shook as she reached for a glass of water, desperate to ground herself. The orchestra shifted into a grander melody, the cue for Andrew to take the stage. He tapped the microphone, his smile sharp enough to wound. Behind him, Ela stood radiant, her gown glittering like fire under the chandeliers. Andrew raised his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just about the future of business, it's about the future of my life. And I am proud to say, his eyes slid toward Emma, mocking, that my future is standing right beside me. Laughter and applause thundered. Emma's knees buckled. The gala was no longer just a celebration. It had become her public execution. And yet, In the darkest corner of the ballroom, someone else was watching, someone powerful, someone who would not let this humiliation be her end. Andrew Weston was the kind of man who had perfected the art of deception. To the outside world, he was a self-made success story, a man who clawed his way up from nothing and turned his name into a brand whispered in boardrooms. Tall, broad-shouldered, with slicked-back hair and a polished smile, he had the look of a man destined to rule. His handshake was firm, his charm magnetic, his promises intoxicating. But behind the mask was a man hollowed by greed, hungry not for love or family, but for control and validation. When Emma first met him, she saw only ambition. He spoke of dreams, of building an empire, of someday giving her the life she deserved. He made her believe she was part of his vision. But once she married him, once she became pregnant, Andrew's true nature began to surface. To him, Emma was no longer a partner. She was baggage, an anchor holding him down, proof that he hadn't yet reached the glamorous life he craved. Enter Yilla Carter. Yilla was 23, striking in a way that turned heads instantly. She had the kind of beauty tailored for Instagram, pouty lips, flawless skin, a body sculpted by Pilates and privilege. She was ambitious, too ambitious, and she saw in Andrew a shortcut to the glittering life she'd always wanted. To her, Emma was nothing but a faded shadow, an old dress tossed aside in favor of something newer, shinier. Andrew and Yilla together were poison. He flaunted her not out of love, but out of cruelty, a weapon to wound Emma in the deepest way possible. And Yilla reveled in it. She whispered in his ear while casting smug glances at Emma. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, her hand lingering too long on his chest, as though staking her claim on territory that never belonged to her. The whispers in the ballroom fed them both like fuel. He traded up, someone chuckled. Finally, a woman who matches his ambition, another added. Andrew basked in the murmurs, his ego swelling with every cruel word. Yilla's smile glittered brighter, knowing the humiliation was cutting Emma to pieces. But what made Andrew truly dangerous wasn't just his betrayal, it was his arrogance. He believed he was untouchable. He believed Emma was powerless, too timid, too poor, too pregnant to ever fight back. He looked at her not as the woman who had supported him, sacrificed for him, carried his child, but as a disposable chapter in his story. Dead weight, he once sneered in private, tossing bills onto the counter after she asked for money for prenatal vitamins. "You're nothing but a burden. Do you think anyone would care about you without my name?" Those words burned inside Emma like acid. Tonight, in the glittering ballroom, he repeated that sentiment with every smug glance, every cruel smile, every boastful toast with Yilla on his arm. He wanted her destroyed. What neither Andrew nor Yilla understood was that their arrogance was writing their downfall. They had made one fatal mistake, underestimating the woman they sought to break. As the orchestra swelled and Andrew clinked his glass against Yilla's, their eyes gleamed with triumph. They thought they had won. They thought Emma was finished. But in the shadows of the ballroom, destiny was shifting, and soon their cruelty would come back to devour them whole. The orchestra softened, the lights dimmed, and all eyes turned to the stage where Andrew Weston stood, champagne glass raised high. Beside him, Yilla Carter shimmered in her crimson gown, her painted lips curled in triumph. "Tonight," Andrew began, his voice ringing through the golden hall, "is about the future. Not just the future of business, but the future of my life." Emma's heart pounded as every face in the ballroom shifted toward him. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass until it threatened to snap. She prayed he wouldn't do what she feared. She prayed he wouldn't use this moment, their moment, to bury her alive. But Andrew thrived on cruelty. He leaned into the microphone, his eyes deliberately finding Emma across the room. "For years," he said smoothly, "I thought I understood love, loyalty, sacrifice, but sometimes life teaches us that what we thought was valuable was only holding us back." The crowd murmured. Emma's chest tightened. He pulled Yilla closer, slipping an arm around her waist. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Yilla Carter, the woman who represents everything I strive for. Elegance, ambition, beauty. She is my true partner, the future I deserve." Gasps rippled across the hall. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered too loudly, "But his wife, she's right there." Emma's world shattered, her vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She stood, frozen, the spotlight of humiliation burning into her skin. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but her baby kicked, a painful reminder that she couldn't collapse. Not now. Andrew wasn't finished. He smirked, his words laced with venom. Some people, he added, eyes locked on Emma, become dead weight, weakness disguised as love. But I won't be chained by weakness any longer. Laughter erupted from a few in the crowd. Yila leaned into the microphone, her voice sweet yet sharp. The past belongs in the past. We're here to celebrate the future. The cruelty was complete. Emma's knees buckled. She stumbled, knocking a water glass from the table beside her. It crashed to the floor, the sound echoing through the stunned silence. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward her. Whispers spread like wildfire. Look at her. How pitiful. She's pregnant, isn't she? Imagine being left like that, publicly. Emma's face burned with shame. Her trembling hands clutched her belly as if shielding her child from the daggers of gossip slicing through the air. She tried to steady herself, tried to find the strength to leave, but her legs felt like lead. And then Andrew delivered the final blow. He raised his glass toward Emma, a mockery of a toast. To moving forward, he said, smirking, to leaving behind what no longer serves us. Applause thundered. Yila's laughter rang like broken glass. Emma's chest caved in. She turned, her body heavy with grief, her soul screaming silently for escape. As she staggered toward the exit, her humiliation immortalized by flashing cameras, she knew the headlines would be merciless. Pregnant wife replaced at gala. But what no one in that ballroom realized, least of all Andrew and Yila, was that Emma's story was far from over. Because the woman they tried to bury was about to rise stronger than they could ever imagine. The night air outside the Crystal Renaissance Hotel was cold and sharp, slicing through Emma's thin dress like a blade. She stumbled down the marble steps, clutching her belly, her breath ragged and uneven. Paparazzi flashes still chased her, their questions brutal. Emma, how do you feel about your husband's new fiancée? Is it true Andrew left you because you're pregnant? Do you have a comment about being replaced? Each word was a dagger, twisting deeper into wounds that were already bleeding. She covered her face with trembling hands, forcing her way through the crowd until she reached the empty street beyond the velvet ropes. Her heels wobbled, her knees buckled, but somehow she kept moving. By the time she reached the corner, her strength gave out. She sank onto the cold stone steps of a shuttered boutique, tears spilling freely at last. The night was quiet here, but inside her head was chaos, a storm of betrayal, humiliation, and fear. She pressed both hands against her swollen stomach, whispering desperately, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I didn't protect us. I didn't see this coming. Please just hold on. Don't leave me too." Her words broke into sobs that shook her entire body. Images replayed in her mind like cruel theater. Andrew's smirk, Yila's mocking laugh, the applause that sealed her humiliation. She felt like she was drowning, dragged under by the weight of shame and despair. The man she had loved, the man she had believed in, had stripped her bare before the world. And now she was alone, pregnant, ridiculed, unwanted. She thought of her parents, long gone, who had raised her to believe in love and loyalty. What would they say if they saw her now? She thought of the nights she had sacrificed for Andrew, the meals skipped so he could have his suits, the endless encouragement she had whispered into his ear. All of it meant nothing. She was nothing. The city carried on around her. Cars hissed through puddles, strangers hurried past without a glance. To them, she was just another broken woman on a cold Manhattan night. Invisible, forgotten. Her chest tightened painfully. She couldn't breathe. Panic clawed at her throat, and she bent forward, gasping. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might faint. She gripped the stone step with one hand, her other clutching her belly, whispering frantically, "Please, please, little one, stay with me. I need you. You're all I have." The baby kicked softly, a flicker of life in the storm. It was enough to keep her conscious, but not enough to erase the crushing weight pressing down on her soul. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that this was the end, that she would never recover from this. That Andrew had not just broken her marriage, but broken her spirit. The humiliation would follow her forever, printed in tabloids, whispered at every corner. Who would ever look at her again and see anything but shame? A car passed, splashing water across her legs. She barely flinched, Her tears had dried into silent sobs, her face pale and hollow. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life. And then, just as her vision began to blur from exhaustion, a pair of polished shoes stopped in front of her. A shadow fell across her trembling body, blocking the streetlight. A man's voice, low and steady, broke through the chaos. "Emma." Her head jerked up, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat. The man standing over her was someone she never expected to see again, and he was about to change everything. The voice was steady, warm, and strangely familiar. Emma blinked through her tears, lifting her gaze. Standing before her was a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding even in the dim glow of the streetlight. His face was handsome but marked by shadows, sharp jawlines, steel-gray eyes, and a scar faintly cutting across his brow. "Victor?" she whispered, disbelief trembling in her voice. Victor Blackwell, a name that once echoed in hushed tones around Andrew's circles. Billionaire. CEO. A man who rarely appeared in public and whose empire stretched from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. To Emma, he had always been a distant figure, almost mythical. The kind of man people gossiped about but never truly understood. Yet here he was, reaching out a hand to help her rise from the cold steps. She hesitated, ashamed of her swollen belly, her tear-streaked face, her trembling frame. But his hand was steady, patient, unshaken. "Come on," he said softly. "You don't belong out here." His words pierced through her despair. No pity, no judgment, just quiet certainty. She let him pull her up, her body weak but her spirit clinging to the unexpected kindness. They stood in silence for a moment, the city humming around them. Finally, Emma found her voice. "Why are you here?" Victor's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering as if torn between truth and restraint. "Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on things. Andrew has no idea how badly he miscalculated tonight." Emma's brows furrowed. "You saw what he did?" "I saw enough," Victor said, his tone dark. "And it won't be forgotten." There was something in his eyes, something deeper than simple outrage. It was grief, buried but raw, the kind that only comes from a wound time cannot heal. Emma recognized it instantly. "You've lost someone," she murmured. Victor stiffened, surprised by her perception. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a sigh heavy as stone, he admitted, "Years ago, my wife. She was carrying our child when there was an accident. I never got to hold either of them." His voice cracked slightly, but he steadied it with iron control. "Since then, I've built everything I have, but it never filled the emptiness." Emma's heart ached. In his eyes, she saw a mirror of her own loneliness, her own shattered dreams. A man who had everything yet lost what mattered most. Victor cleared his throat, straightening. "That's why I can't stand by and watch Andrew destroy you. You and your baby deserve better than this." His words struck her like a spark in the dark. No one had spoken to her like that. Not Andrew. Not anyone. For the first time in months, she felt seen, valued, worthy. But a wave of doubt washed over her. "I don't have anything," she whispered. "No money, no power. I'm just broken." Victor's lips curved into a faint smile. "That's where you're wrong, Emma. You have more power than you realize, and I'm going to help you see it." Her breath caught. "Why?" He held her gaze, his voice steady, his promise unshakable. "Because no man gets to decide your worth. Not Andrew, not anyone. It's time you remembered who you are." Emma felt a shiver run through her. For the first time, the darkness didn't feel endless. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as powerless as she thought. What she didn't yet know was that Victor carried secrets about her past, secrets that would soon turn her humiliation into unstoppable power. The car ride was silent except for the hum of the city outside. Victor's sleek black limousine cut through the Manhattan night, leaving behind the glittering cruelty of the gala. Emma sat curled against the leather seat, her hands protectively cradling her belly, her heart still raw from humiliation. Victor watched her quietly, his gaze steady but unreadable. At last, he spoke. "Emma, there's something you need to know. Something Andrew never understood. Something you've been made to forget." She looked at him warily. "What do you mean?" "You think you're powerless," Victor said, leaning forward, his voice low. "But the truth is, you carry a legacy far greater than Andrew could ever dream of. Do you remember your mother's family? The Hayes estate?" Emma blinked. Her mother. It had been years since she thought of her that way. Her mother had died young, leaving Emma with memories of gentle hands and lullabies, not fortunes or legacies. The Hayes estate, it was sold, wasn't it, after she passed? Victor shook his head. No, your mother was not just a teacher's wife, Emma. She was the heir to the Hayes Group, a conglomerate with investments in real estate, technology, and global trade. When she married your father, she chose to step away from that world. But the inheritance, it was always meant for you. Emma's lips parted, stunned. That can't be true. I've lived paycheck to paycheck. If what you're saying is real, why didn't anyone tell me? Victor's eyes softened. Because your mother wanted to protect you. She knew the kind of predators who circle wealth. She wanted you to live free of greed and lies, at least for a time. But she made sure safeguards were in place. A trust. Assets waiting for you to claim. I know because I promised her I would keep watch until the day you were ready. Emma's head spun. Memories flooded back. Her mother's whispered warnings, the letters she never fully understood, the strange visitors who came after her funeral. Could it all have been connected? Her voice cracked. So all this time, I wasn't nothing? Victor leaned closer, his steel-gray eyes fierce. You were never nothing. Andrew thought he was marrying a secretary. What he really married was the rightful heir to a billion-dollar empire. And now he's thrown you aside, believing you're powerless. That is his greatest mistake. Emma's chest tightened. Anger flickered in her heart, small but burning. The humiliation of the gala, Andrew's cruel words, Hila's mocking smile, all of it collided with the revelation now before her. She was not weak, she was not worthless. She carried a legacy that could crush the very man who tried to destroy her. Victor placed a folder on the seat between them. Inside are the documents. Proof of your trust, shares in companies Andrew could never touch, a fortune waiting for you to claim. All you need to do is decide, will you keep letting them mock you, or will you take back what is rightfully yours? Emma hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the folder. Her reflection in the limousine window stared back at her, tear-streaked, swollen with pregnancy, but alive, stronger than she realized. Her fingers brushed the folder. A spark of defiance lit in her chest, for her child, for herself, for every humiliation Andrew had inflicted. She looked up at Victor, her voice steady for the first time that night. Show me how. Victor's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Good, because tomorrow, Emma Weston stops being a victim. Tomorrow, the world will meet Emma Hayes, the queen Andrew never saw coming. And with that, the first seeds of her revenge were sown. The next morning, Emma barely recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror of Victor's penthouse guest suite. Gone was the fragile, tear-streaked wife who had stumbled out of the gala like a ghost. In her place stood someone raw but resolute, eyes swollen from grief, yet burning with a strange new fire. Victor had given her the night to rest, but when dawn broke, he was waiting with a team, stylists, advisors, and lawyers. Emma resisted at first, overwhelmed. She had always been simple, second-hand dresses, discount makeup, hair tied in a plain knot. But Victor insisted this was not about vanity, it was about armor. You don't step back into battle wearing rags, he told her. You wear power, and you wear it well. The stylists worked with quiet efficiency. They tailored elegant maternity gowns that hugged her belly with dignity instead of shame. Her hair, once limp and forgotten, was styled into glossy waves that framed her face like a crown. Subtle makeup highlighted her natural beauty, soft yet commanding. When she looked in the mirror again, she didn't see weakness. She saw potential. But the true transformation wasn't in silk or cosmetics. It was in the documents Victor placed on the mahogany desk. Contracts, bank statements, trust deeds, all proof of her rightful inheritance. Emma listened as the lawyers explained her stake in corporations across the globe, assets that could change boardrooms with a single signature. Her hands trembled as she signed the first paper, claiming what had always been hers. With every stroke of the pen, she felt the chains Andrew had wrapped around her breaking. She was no longer the powerless wife begging for scraps of his attention. She was an heiress, reclaiming her crown. Still, fear lingered. Emma confessed it late that afternoon when the advisors had left and only she and Victor remained. What if I fail? What if I don't belong in that world? Victor studied her, his expression unreadable but his voice steady. Emma, you were born into it. You've survived worse than any of those men in suits ever could. Failure isn't in your blood. Strength is. His words sank deep. For the first time in months, Emma straightened her spine, placing a hand on her belly. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the child who deserved a life free of humiliation and neglect. That evening, Victor took her to a private dinner with a handful of trusted allies, powerful figures who had once respected her mother. At first, Emma felt out of place, nerves twisting in her stomach. But when the conversation turned to her late mother's vision, something inside her awoke. She spoke with passion about loyalty, integrity, and the future she wanted to build for her child. The room fell silent, captivated. Afterward, one of the older men leaned toward Victor and whispered, just loud enough for Emma to hear, "She has her mother's fire. Andrew Weston has no idea what's coming." Emma's chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not in Andrew, not in a husband who mocked her, but in herself. Later that night, as she stood on Victor's balcony overlooking the city skyline, Emma whispered to her unborn child, "We're not broken anymore. We're rising." And soon, the very city that had witnessed her humiliation would bow to her rebirth. The invitation arrived quietly, yet its weight was undeniable. The Harrington Foundation Charity Banquet, an event rivaling the Bright Futures Gala, attended by senators, CEOs, and celebrities. It was the perfect stage, Victor explained, for Emma to step out of the shadows and claim her rightful place. Emma hesitated at first. Her memory of the last gala was still raw, the sting of whispers and flashing cameras haunting her. But this time was different. This time she would not arrive as Andrew's discarded wife. She would arrive as Emma Hayes, the woman with power, wealth, and dignity of her own. The night of the banquet, cameras lined the crimson carpet outside the Metropolitan Grand. Paparazzi shouted names, bulbs flashing like lightning. At first, no one noticed the sleek black car that pulled up to the entrance. But when the door opened, silence fell like a wave. Emma stepped out. She wore a floor-length midnight blue gown that shimmered with every step, tailored to her pregnant figure with grace, not shame. Diamonds glistened at her ears, heirlooms once belonging to her mother. Her hair cascaded in glossy waves, her chin lifted, her gaze steady. For the first time, Emma did not shrink from the cameras. She embraced them. Click, click, click. The flashes erupted, a storm of light desperate to capture the transformation. The whispers this time were not cruel, but awestruck. "Is that Emma Weston? She looks regal. Wait, she's not just Andrew's wife. Who is she really?" Victor stepped out beside her, offering his arm like a silent declaration of alliance. The sight of the two together, a commanding billionaire and the radiant woman once humiliated, was enough to set social media ablaze before they even reached the doors. Inside the banquet hall, heads turned, conversations halted. The very same elite who once pitied her now scrambled to remember her name, to place her new aura of power. The host, taken aback, hurried to greet her personally. "Mrs. Hayes, isn't it an honor to have you?" Emma smiled softly. "Yes, Emma Hayes, thank you for having me." Her voice carried across the room, calm, confident, unshaken. Across the hall, a familiar laugh rang out, high-pitched and cruel. Yila Carter. She was draped in sequins, clinging to Andrew's arm like a trophy. When she spotted Emma, her laughter died mid-breath. Andrew turned, his smirk faltering as his eyes landed on the woman he thought he had destroyed. Emma did not flinch. She met their stares with quiet fire, then turned her attention back to the waiting host, dismissing Andrew as though he were nothing more than another man in the crowd. The humiliation was his this time, subtle but sharp. Throughout the evening, Emma held her ground with grace. She spoke about her mother's legacy, about the Hayes Foundation's plans to expand scholarships and health care for women. Her words drew admiration, her poise silenced doubters. By the end of the night, she wasn't just a guest, she was the headline. "Pregnant heiress Emma Hayes stuns at banquet," the news would read. From shame to power, the woman rewriting the story. As she left the hall with Victor by her side, Emma felt the shift in the air. She was no longer a victim whispered about in pity. She was a queen in the making, and Andrew Weston, watching from the shadows, realized with dawning horror that his greatest mistake was underestimating her. Andrew Weston had always believed in control of his image, his wealth, his wife. He strutted through life, convinced no one could touch him. But the night of the Harrington banquet cracked that illusion wide open. The next morning, his phone buzzed with headlines that turned his blood cold. Emma Hayes, heiress to Hayes Group, stuns in first public appearance. Not just a wife, pregnant billionaire heiress reclaims spotlight. Andrew Weston's humiliated ex revealed as powerhouse heir. He threw his phone across the room, glass shattering against the wall. Hila rushed in, her sequined robe hanging off one shoulder, feigning innocence. "What's wrong, darling?" she purred, though her eyes were already scanning the broken screen for answers. Andrew's jaw tightened. "She lied to me. She let me believe she was nothing." Hila's smirk faltered. "Wait, you mean she actually is rich?" "She's more than rich," Andrew spat. "She's powerful. Hayes Group owns shares in companies that keep my empire afloat. And if she decides to move against me—" He stopped, rage boiling beneath his skin. Hila's silence said everything. She hadn't signed up for a losing man. Meanwhile, Emma's reappearance rippled through Wall Street like an earthquake. Investors whispered her name in boardrooms, and stocks tied to Hayes Group surged overnight. Andrew's own investors began to doubt him, questioning his judgment, his arrogance, his treatment of the very woman now hailed as the pregnant queen of finance. Calls flooded his office. Some were board members demanding answers. Others were reporters sniffing for blood. "Is it true your wife was the heiress all along? How could you not know? How could you discard her so publicly?" Andrew tried to fight back. He stormed into meetings, slamming his fist on the table, vowing he would not be overshadowed by a woman with a swollen belly and a sob story. But the sneers around him said it all. He was no longer feared, only ridiculed. Behind closed doors, Hila's loyalty wavered. She still played the part of the doting mistress in public, but in private, her eyes were cold, calculating. She had no interest in tying herself to a sinking ship. Andrew noticed her growing distance, and it only fed his paranoia. Desperation drove him to reckless choices. He funneled company funds into risky deals, hoping for a miracle turnaround. Instead, whispers of fraud began to surface. Regulators sniffed around his accounts. A single exposé, just one leak, and the empire he built could collapse. Emma, watching from Victor's side, didn't lift a finger, yet she didn't need to. Andrew was destroying himself, one arrogant decision at a time, and she understood the beauty of patience. At night, she stood on Victor's balcony, the city glowing beneath her, her hands resting on her belly. "He thinks I'm still weak," she whispered to her unborn child. "But every empire built on cruelty crumbles eventually, and when it does, we'll be there to watch." By the end of the week, Andrew received a notice that froze his accounts pending investigation. The man who once toasted to his brilliant future now sat alone in his penthouse, staring at empty glasses and unpaid bills. And he knew, though he would never admit it, that Emma Hayes had become the storm he could not survive. The cracks in Andrew Weston's empire spread faster than he could patch them. Investors pulled out, regulators circled, and whispers of fraud filled every corner of Wall Street. But the most devastating blow didn't come from a courtroom or a boardroom. It came from the woman he thought was his prize. Hila Carter had always loved mirrors. She loved the way they reflected her beauty, the way they confirmed she was still the star of every room. But one morning, as she scrolled through headlines on her diamond-encrusted phone, the reflection staring back at her looked less like a star and more like a liability. Emma Hayes emerges as billionaire heiress. Andrew Weston's mistress, overshadowed by pregnant queen. Who really belongs at the top? Hila's painted lips tightened. The pictures were everywhere. Emma glowing in her midnight gown, standing beside Victor Blackwell, admired, applauded. Hila, by contrast, was a footnote. Her smirk beside Andrew's now mocked instead of envied. That night, when Andrew stormed into their penthouse, reeking of whiskey and desperation, Hila watched him with new eyes. His once polished tuxedo was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his face drawn with sleepless rage. He slammed documents onto the table, ranting about frozen accounts and disloyal board members. "We'll fight back," he shouted. "I'll take her down. Emma thinks she can humiliate me? She has no idea who she's dealing with." Hila crossed her legs slowly, sipping champagne she hadn't paid for. "Andrew, darling," she drawled, "maybe it's not Emma who doesn't know. Maybe it's you." His eyes snapped to hers, sharp with fury. "What are you saying?" She set the glass down, her voice honeyed but cold. "I didn't sign up for bankruptcy. I didn't leave everything behind to watch you drown. You promised me power, glamour, a future, but right now all you're promising is scandal." Andrew's face reddened. You ungrateful. Don't. Her voice cut through his rage like ice. You think I'll sink with you? I'm smarter than that, and prettier. She rose gracefully, her gown glittering under the penthouse lights. Men like you are everywhere, Andrew. Replaceable. But women like me, she smiled cruelly. We land on our feet. He staggered toward her, his fury barely contained, but she stepped back, her heels clicking against the marble. Careful, Andrew. Cameras love a man who hits. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down and smirked. Speaking of which, I have dinner plans, with someone whose accounts aren't frozen. And with that, she left him standing in the ruins of his empire, the slam of the door echoing like a verdict. Within days, photographs surfaced of Yila on the arm of another tycoon, older, wealthier, untarnished by scandal. The gossip columns tore into Andrew with savage delight. First his wife, now his mistress, one headline sneered. Weston left with nothing. For Emma, watching the headlines unfold from Victor's office, the irony was sharp. Yila had once laughed at her humiliation. Now the same cameras captured Yila's betrayal of the man who discarded her. But Emma didn't gloat, at least not aloud. She rested a hand on her belly, her voice low and steady. The game is turning, little one, and this is only the beginning. Because while Andrew's mistress had abandoned him, Emma was about to deliver the final blow herself. The boardroom of Weston Holdings had never felt so cold. Once, Andrew Weston had commanded it with swagger, his voice echoing with authority as men twice his age nodded in agreement. But now the long mahogany table was lined with stone faces, board members, investors, and reporters, each waiting for the show to begin. Emma entered with quiet grace, her midnight blue gown flowing, her hand resting gently on her pregnant belly. Victor walked beside her, silent but formidable, his presence enough to unnerve the most seasoned executives. Cameras clicked furiously. The woman Andrew had humiliated was no longer his shadow. She was the storm. Andrew rose quickly, his arrogance stripped bare. His eyes darted between Emma and the crowd, desperation leaking from every gesture. Emma, he began, voice cracking, please, we need to talk privately. Emma's eyes never wavered. No, Andrew, we'll talk here, in front of the people who watched you betray me, in front of the people who deserve the truth. A ripple of whispers swept the room. Andrew swallowed hard, sweat glistening at his temples. Look, I made mistakes, he said, his tone falsely contrite. But we can fix this. You and I, we built a life together. Don't throw it away. Emma's lips curved into a bitter smile. Built a life together? You paraded another woman in front of me while I carried your child. You called me dead weight. You left me humiliated. That wasn't building, Andrew. That was destruction. He stepped closer, lowering his voice though the microphones caught every word. You don't understand. I need you. Without your name, your inheritance, I. Exactly, Emma cut in sharply, her voice ringing clear. You don't want me. You want my power, and that is why you will never have either again. Gasps filled the room. Andrew's face twisted, but before he could reply, Emma reached into her clutch and pulled out a folder. For months, Andrew has accused me of weakness. But weakness isn't signing documents to hide fraud. Weakness isn't lying to investors while your company rots from the inside. That's cowardice. She laid the folder on the table. Inside were documents Victor's team had uncovered, evidence of Andrew's financial manipulations, secret accounts, illegal transfers. The board members lunged forward, their eyes widening as they scanned the proof. This, Emma continued, her voice unwavering, is the man who mocked me in public. This is the man who called himself a leader, and this is the man who will answer for every lie he's told. The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed, investors shouted, and Andrew's protests drowned in the storm. He reached for Emma's hand in a last attempt, his voice breaking. Please, Emma, don't do this. I loved you once. Doesn't that mean anything? Emma looked down at him, her gaze colder than ice. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't abandon a pregnant wife in front of the world. She pulled her hand away, her words final. You lost me the moment you chose cruelty over loyalty, and now you've lost everything else too. The board chair stood, slamming a gavel. Effective immediately, Andrew Weston is removed from his position as CEO. Pending investigation, all his assets are frozen. The cameras caught it all. Andrew's face collapsing into disbelief, his empire crumbling in a single breath. And in that moment, Emma Hayes wasn't just his ex-wife. She was the queen who had brought a tyrant to his knees. The morning after Andrew's public downfall, the city awoke to a new queen. Newsstands were plastered with her image. Emma Hayes in her midnight gown, chin lifted, eyes blazing with defiance. Headlines screamed across every front page. From humiliation to power, Emma Hayes crushes ex-husband in shocking showdown. Pregnant heiress emerges as new face of strength. A queen is born in New York. Emma had not expected the tidal wave of attention. For months she had been invisible, whispered about in pity, pitied in tabloids as the abandoned wife. But now people stopped her on the street, not to sneer, but to applaud. Women clasped her hands and whispered, "You gave us courage." Men nodded respectfully, no longer seeing her as Andrew's shadow, but as a force of her own. Victor watched quietly from the sidelines, pride flickering in his steel-gray eyes. He knew this was only the beginning. Emma wasn't just reclaiming her place, she was redefining it. At a press conference organized days later, Emma stood behind the podium, her hand gently resting on her rounded belly. The room was packed with journalists, cameras, and curious onlookers. The last time she had faced this kind of scrutiny, she had been humiliated. Now she held the power. "I once believed my worth depended on someone else," Emma began, her voice calm but resonant. "I believed love meant sacrifice, even when it destroyed me, but I was wrong. No woman should ever apologize for her strength. No woman should ever be silenced, betrayed, or discarded. We are not burdens, we are the builders of empires." Applause thundered. Some reporters even stood, clapping with genuine emotion. Emma continued, "I will not let my story end in shame. Instead, I will use my inheritance, my voice, and my future to create opportunities for women like me. Women told they were nothing, women left behind. Together, we will rise." The press ate it up. By the next morning, Emma Hayes, pregnant heiress for women's empowerment, dominated every media cycle. Brands began courting her for collaborations, charities begged for her presence, and her influence soared. But it wasn't just about image. Behind the scenes, Emma began consolidating power. With Victor's guidance, she secured her rightful shares in Hayes Group, gaining a voting stake that sent shockwaves through corporate boardrooms. Men who once dismissed her as weak now scrambled to align with her. She moved with quiet precision, making decisions that protected jobs, expanded programs, and proved she wasn't just a headline. She was a leader. One evening, as she walked into a gala hosted in her honor, she wore a gown of ivory silk that gleamed under the chandeliers. It wasn't just fabric, it was armor. The cameras captured every step, every confident smile. For the world, this was the image of rebirth. The woman who had been shamed, now radiant, untouchable, unstoppable. Yet for Emma, the most powerful moment came in private. Standing before a mirror, she whispered to her unborn child, "They see me as a queen now, but you, my love, you are the reason I rose. You gave me the strength to fight when I wanted to disappear. And when you arrive, you'll be welcomed into a world where your mother never bowed to cruelty." Her reflection no longer frightened her. She was not broken. She was not weak. She was Emma Hayes, reborn in fire, crowned in resilience. And the world, still reeling from her rise, had no idea how much further her influence would reach. The storm broke in the middle of the night. Emma awoke to a sharp pain that ripped through her body, forcing her upright in bed. For a moment, panic swallowed her. Had the stress, the humiliation, the endless battles finally taken their toll? She clutched her belly, breath ragged. The baby was coming. Victor was at her side within seconds. He had been working late in the study, reviewing contracts tied to Hayes Group, but the moment he heard her cry, his world narrowed to her alone. "Emma," he said urgently, sliding an arm behind her back, steadying her trembling form. "It's time. I've already prepared the car. Let's go." The ride to the hospital blurred in flashes of neon and rain. Emma fought to steady her breathing, tears streaking down her face. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if I fail him, fail the baby?" Victor gripped her hand tightly, his steel-gray eyes glistening for the first time. "Listen to me. You are the strongest woman I've ever known. You carried dignity when others tried to strip it away. You built fire from ashes. You will not fail this child. You will give him life, and I'll be right here, every step." At the hospital, chaos swirled around them. Doctors, nurses, machines. Yet through it all, Victor never let go of her hand. He whispered encouragement between contractions, wiped sweat from her brow, steadied her when her voice cracked from exhaustion. To him this was not just a birth, it was redemption. Years ago he had lost his wife and unborn child in one tragic instant. Tonight, fate had given him a second chance, not to replace them, but to honor them by protecting Emma and the new life she carried. Hours passed. Emma's cries echoed down sterile halls, her body pushed to its breaking point. At one moment, she nearly collapsed, sobbing, "I can't do this, Victor. I can't." He leaned down, his forehead pressing gently against hers. "Yes, you can. And when you hold him in your arms, you'll know every ounce of pain was worth it." Finally, with one last cry, the room erupted in a new sound, the fragile, powerful wail of a newborn child. Emma's tears turned to sobs of joy as the nurse laid the tiny boy on her chest. His skin was warm, his cries piercing, his little fingers curling instinctively around hers. Emma whispered through her tears, "My son, my beautiful son." Victor stepped back slightly, his throat tightening as he watched the scene he had once lost replayed before him. This time not in grief, but in triumph. The baby's cries seemed to pierce through the years of emptiness he had carried, filling a hollow part of him with light. Emma looked up at him, her eyes red but glowing. "Victor, meet your godson, if you'll accept." For a moment, his breath caught. Godson. The word nearly undid him, but he nodded, his voice thick. "It would be the greatest honor of my life." Yet in his heart, he already knew. He loved this child as his own. He loved Emma more than he dared to confess. And he would spend every day proving it, not with declarations, but with unwavering devotion. What neither of them realized was that this moment, the birth of her son, would bind their fates forever in ways neither Andrew nor the world could ever undo. The world had already begun to crown Emma Hayes as its newest queen. News outlets praised her rebirth, investors clamored for meetings, and charities lined up for her endorsement. But in the shadows, Andrew Weston seethed. His empire had crumbled, his mistress had fled, and his name had become a punchline. There was only one card left for him to play: the child. One rainy afternoon, Emma sat in the sunlit nursery of Victor's penthouse, rocking her newborn son in her arms. The soft hum of a lullaby filled the air, a melody her mother once sang to her. For the first time in months, peace seemed possible. She kissed her baby's tiny forehead and whispered, "You're safe now. No one will ever hurt you." But safety was an illusion. The doorbell rang, and before Victor's security could stop him, Andrew stormed into the foyer. His hair was unkempt, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He looked less like a businessman and more like a desperate man clinging to scraps. "Emma," he said, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk." Victor appeared instantly, his stance protective, but Emma lifted a hand. Her spine straightened as she placed her baby gently in the crib. She turned to face Andrew, the man who had once broken her, now a ghost of his former self. "There's nothing left to say," she told him, her voice steady. Andrew stepped forward, ignoring Victor's looming presence. "That's my son in there," he hissed. "And you think you can just cut me out? No. I won't let you. I made mistakes, but I'm still his father." Emma's eyes flashed with fury. "A father? You humiliated me while I carried him. You called us dead weight. You abandoned us in front of the world. You forfeited the right to call yourself his father the night you raised a toast to leaving me behind." Andrew's hands shook. "Emma, listen to me. I've lost everything. The board, the money, Gila, they're all gone. But we can rebuild. For our son, we can start over." Victor's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You don't want Emma. You don't want that baby. You want a lifeline. And you'll use anyone to get it." Andrew's face twisted. "Stay out of this, Blackwell. You think you're some hero? You're nothing but a vulture circling what I built." Victor stepped closer, his presence towering. "What you built was a cage of lies. Emma doesn't need saving from me. She already saved herself." The tension crackled like lightning. For a moment, Emma almost pitied Andrew. Almost. But then she remembered every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every tear she had shed because of him. She lifted her chin, her voice slicing through the silence. "You want to claim this child now? The same child you tried to erase from your life? No, Andrew. You don't get to rewrite history. He is mine, and he will grow up knowing love, not humiliation. Strength, not cruelty. You are nothing to him." Andrew's face crumbled, his desperation spilling into rage. But before he could respond, security closed in, escorting him toward the door. His shouts echoed through the hall. "This isn't over, Emma. You'll regret this." Emma turned back to the crib, her son stirring softly. She stroked his tiny hand and whispered, "No, Andrew, the only one living with regret will be you." Because the war he thought he could win had already been lost the moment she stopped being afraid. The ballroom of the Conrad International Hotel shimmered with light as journalists, investors, and dignitaries gathered for the Global Finance Summit. It was the kind of event Andrew Weston once ruled with his smug grin and hollow promises. Tonight, however, all eyes were on Emma Hayes. She stood at the podium, radiant in a white silk gown that flowed like armor, her son safe at home under Victor's watchful care. The room hummed with anticipation. Emma had called this press conference herself, and whispers of scandal had already spread like wildfire. She adjusted the microphone, her calm gaze sweeping the crowd. "Thank you all for being here. Tonight, I am not just speaking as an heiress or as a woman who was humiliated in public. I am speaking as someone who believes in truth." The cameras zoomed in, flashes flickering. For months, Andrew Weston has presented himself as a leader, a visionary. But behind closed doors, he was not building empires, he was building lies. Gasps rippled through the hall. Emma reached into her folder and pulled out documents. Bank transfers, falsified reports, offshore accounts. Victor's team had uncovered them all. She held them high, then passed them to the journalists in the front row. "These are the records of Andrew Weston's fraud," she continued. "Millions funneled illegally, investors deceived, charities robbed. The man who once called me dead weight was dragging this city into ruin with every false deal he signed." The room erupted in whispers, cameras flashing like fireworks. One reporter shouted, "Mrs. Hayes, are you saying Andrew Weston will face charges?" Emma's voice was steady, sharp as steel. "Yes. As of this morning, the evidence has been submitted to federal investigators. Andrew Weston is no longer just a failed husband. He is a criminal, and he will answer for every betrayal, not just of me, but of every person who trusted him." The crowd broke into stunned applause. Even hardened executives rose from their seats, unable to contain the tidal wave of respect swelling for the woman who had once been dismissed as powerless. Across the city, Andrew watched the broadcast on a cracked television in a dingy hotel room, his jaw tight, his hands shaking with rage. Every word Emma spoke was another nail in the coffin of his reputation. He hurled the remote across the room, but the screen kept showing her face, strong, resolute, untouchable. Back in the ballroom, Emma wasn't finished. She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice softer but even more piercing. "When Andrew humiliated me, I thought my story was over. But humiliation is not the end. It is the beginning of strength. And today, I stand before you not as his victim, but as a woman who refused to be silenced." Thunderous applause shook the chandeliers. Reporters rushed forward, shouting her name, snapping photos that would dominate tomorrow's front pages. Victor, watching from the side of the stage, allowed himself the smallest smile. He had known she carried fire in her blood, but tonight, she had become unstoppable. Emma stepped back from the podium, her chin lifted, her heart pounding. For the first time, she felt not just reborn, but triumphant. And as the world applauded, Andrew Weston realized there was no shadow left for him to hide in. His crimes were exposed, and his reign was finished. Hila Carter had always believed she was untouchable. She had youth, beauty, and the audacity to flaunt both like weapons. When she first appeared on Andrew Weston's arm, she bathed in the glow of flashing cameras, smug in the belief that she had replaced Emma forever. But the world has a cruel way of turning on those who mock others' pain. After Emma's explosive press conference, every headline carried the same sting. Andrew Weston exposed. His name was poison, and anyone connected to him became collateral damage. That included Hila. Within days, brands she had once promoted on her social media cut ties. Her glamorous sponsorships evaporated. Invitations to exclusive parties stopped arriving. When she showed up uninvited to a high-society gala, she was turned away at the door, photographers capturing every humiliating second. "Security, escort her out," a host whispered coldly, as cameras flashed at her tear-streaked face. For the first time, Hila wasn't the woman everyone envied. She was the cautionary tale everyone whispered about. But the worst came weeks later. At an auction held by the Harrington Foundation, Emma had been invited as the guest of honor, her influence now undeniable. The ballroom gleamed with chandeliers and polished silver, packed with the city's elite. Emma entered in a flowing emerald gown, her presence commanding, Victor at her side. And then Hila appeared. She wasn't on the guest list, but desperation drove her past the guards. Her once perfect hair was dull, her dress borrowed and ill-fitting. She scanned the room, her eyes wild until they landed on Emma. The crowd fell silent, whispers buzzing like bees. Hila's heels clicked furiously as she stormed forward. "Emma!" she cried, her voice shrill. "You think you've won? You think you're better than me just because you've got money and Victor's arm?" Emma didn't flinch. She stood tall, her hand resting lightly on her son's small bracelet at her wrist, a symbol of what truly mattered. "No, Hila," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the room. "I don't think I'm better than you. I just chose not to sell my dignity for a moment of attention." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed, catching Hila's face as it twisted with rage and humiliation. "You were nothing without Andrew," Hila spat, her voice breaking. "And you'll be nothing again." Emma's gaze was steady, her tone like steel wrapped in silk. "Funny, because Andrew is gone, and I'm still here." The words landed like a slap. Hila's cheeks flushed crimson. Security moved in, gently but firmly, taking her by the arms. The crowd began murmuring louder, some jeering, others shaking their heads in disgust. One journalist shouted, "Miss Carter, how does it feel to fall so far?" Another added, "Do you regret mocking Emma Hayes at the Bright Futures Gala?" Hila's composure shattered. Tears streaked her makeup, her sobs echoing through the hall as she was dragged toward the exit. Photographers swarmed, their cameras immortalizing her collapse. Emma didn't watch her leave. She turned back to the auction stage, her dignity intact, her influence only growing. For her, Hila was no longer a rival, just a broken reminder of cruelty turned to ash. That night, the headlines were merciless. From mistress to outcast, Hila Carter's fall. The queen rises, the pretender falls. And as the city mocked Hila's downfall, Emma's legend only blazed brighter. Andrew Weston sat alone in the dimly lit courtroom, the polished oak walls closing in like a cage. Once, he had entered rooms like this with a swagger, lawyers at his beck and call, his name enough to bend decisions. Now the only sound was the shuffle of papers as the prosecutor laid out the charges against him: fraud, embezzlement, securities violations. Each word landed like a hammer, stripping him of the last scraps of dignity he clung to. The gallery was packed. Reporters filled every seat, their pens ready, cameras flashing. Investors who had once shaken Andrew's hand now glared at him with contempt. Even his former allies sat stone-faced, waiting for the verdict that would sever him from their world forever. When the judge entered, silence fell. Andrew's chest tightened. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but the words blurred into static. He wasn't hearing strategy. He was hearing his empire crumble, piece by piece. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Mr. Weston not only manipulated investors but also siphoned millions into offshore accounts while portraying himself as a visionary. His fraud endangered jobs, charities, and the trust of this city. We demand full accountability." Emma's name was mentioned more than once, not as a victim, but as the woman who brought truth to light. Andrew flinched each time, as if her presence still haunted him. He could picture her in her emerald gown, chin high, the applause echoing in his ears. She had risen while he fell. She was untouchable now, while he was shackled to disgrace. The judge's words cut like steel. Given the severity of the crimes and the betrayal of public trust, this court sentences Andrew Weston to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. The gavel slammed. Cameras exploded in flashes. Andrew's world ended in that moment. He slumped back into his chair, his hands trembling. The guards moved in, handcuffs clinking as they closed around his wrists. The weight of metal bit into his skin, cold and final. Reporters shouted questions as he was led away. "Andrew, do you regret humiliating your wife? Do you think Emma Hayes won in the end? What do you have to say about being dethroned by the woman you betrayed?" He kept his head down, shame burning hotter than rage. The once proud man who raised toasts over champagne was now a cautionary tale in shackles. Outside, the crowd jeered. Protesters held signs reading "Justice for the Betrayed" and "No More Westons." His name, once a symbol of power, was now synonymous with failure and disgrace. That night, as he lay on a thin prison cot, Andrew Weston finally faced the silence he had always drowned with noise. Money, women, parties, arrogance. And in that silence, only one truth echoed. Emma Hayes had destroyed him without lifting a sword. She had done it with truth, dignity, and strength. His final thought before sleep claimed him was not of empire or wealth, but of the woman he had underestimated, the woman who had become a queen while he rotted in chains. And so ended Andrew Weston, not with applause, but with the sound of a gavel, a prison door, and the triumph of the woman he once called weak. The spring sun bathed the Hayes estate gardens in golden light, casting a warm glow over rows of white roses and towering oak trees. Guests from around the world gathered beneath silk canopies, their eyes fixed on the aisle that stretched like a river of ivory petals. This was no ordinary wedding. It was the union of two lives rebuilt from ashes, a celebration of triumph over betrayal. Emma stood at the entrance, her veil glimmering softly, her gown designed with elegance and strength in mind. She carried not just beauty, but the quiet authority of a woman who had endured humiliation, heartbreak, and rebirth. At her side, a bridesmaid gently held her son, now a few months old, wrapped in white satin. The child cooed happily, unaware that his mother was about to rewrite her destiny once again. As the orchestra swelled, Emma stepped forward. Each footfall was steady, sure. She was no longer the broken wife shuffled to the shadows. She was the queen of her own story. And at the altar waited Victor Blackwell, his eyes filled with a tenderness that had once seemed impossible for a man scarred by loss. When Emma reached him, Victor extended his hand, not in dominance but in partnership. Their fingers intertwined, and for a moment the world seemed to fall away. The officiant spoke of vows, of love reborn, of second chances. When it came time for Emma to speak, her voice carried across the hushed crowd. Once I thought love was about sacrifice without return. I thought strength meant silence. But today, I stand here because I learned that true love doesn't humiliate, it lifts. And true strength isn't in suffering alone, it's in choosing to rise again. Victor, you've shown me that love can heal even the deepest wounds. I choose you, not because I need saving, but because with you, I can build something greater than myself. Victor's reply was low but steady, his voice breaking with emotion. I lost everything once, my wife, my child, my hope. I thought my life would remain empty. But then you appeared, carrying pain that mirrored mine, yet courage that humbled me. Emma, you and your son are not my second chance, you are my only chance. And I vow to honor you, to protect you, to walk beside you as your equal forever. Applause erupted as they sealed their vows with a kiss. The moment was captured by cameras, broadcast across the world. Not as gossip, but as inspiration. The headlines read, "From betrayal to power, Emma Hayes marries Victor Blackwell in historic union." Later that night, as lanterns lit the gardens and music filled the air, Emma cradled her son in her arms while Victor stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on her back. Together, they looked out over their guests, business titans, world leaders, women who had once whispered pity now offering admiration. Emma whispered softly to her child, "This is our family now, built on truth, love, and resilience. No one will ever take that from us." Victor leaned down, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We're not just a family, Emma. We're a dynasty." And as the night sky glittered above, the world finally understood. The woman who had been humiliated, abandoned, and shamed had risen higher than anyone dared imagine. Emma Hayes was no longer a victim. She was a queen, and with Victor Blackwell by her side, she had become unstoppable. So that's how our story comes to an end, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me, right? If you've stayed until now, it means something in Emma's journey touched your heart in a way words can't quite explain. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, your own moments of feeling small, unseen, or broken. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you but how you react to it that matters." Emma's life was torn apart, yet she rose, not because pain disappeared, but because she refused to let it define her. That's the real lesson here. We may not control betrayal, humiliation, or loss, but we always control how we rise after. And Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Every obstacle can become the very reason you grow stronger. Emma's humiliation became her crown, her heartbreak became her power. So if you're watching this, take her story with you. Stand taller. Choose dignity over despair. And if this touched you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs courage today, and subscribe so we can walk through more stories of resilience together. Because maybe, just maybe, the next queen rising could be you.